Commissioner Baines just called, said they're on the way over.
So basically, we're still waiting.
All right, so we were expecting a press conference at the top of the hour for a briefing on a school shooting, a possible school shooting at a school in Perry, Iowa. Let's bring in former Boston Police Commissioner Ed Davis for some analysis on this. Commissioner, obviously, as you know, if the officials on the ground begin speaking, we'll probably have to cut our chat short. But as you also know, they may tell us it's starting at 11 o'clock and it may be some time before they actually step to the microphone. So with that caveat, let's talk about what first responders and police are doing at this moment. My guess is that if we're seeing a sheriff stepping to the microphone in a few moments, that the area is presumably secure?
Yes, it would appear that way. Remember, the first job of the first responders is to secure the area and assist people who have been injured. But even before that, it's necessary to go to the sound of gunfire and to make sure that the scene is secure. So that really is the first order of business, is to get into that school quickly, put together an initial entry team, get in there and try to identify who's responsible for this and stop that as quickly as possible.
You know, we've been talking sort of earlier about how, sadly, we've covered a number of school shootings, and school security and police protocol have all changed in response to this sort of thing. How would an investigation like this unfold? Police get a call that there's a suspected shooter. Then what happens?
Well, response to the scene, securing the scene, and removing the victims. Then it's a matter of stabilizing things, evacuating people from the building, and making sure that no one goes in there except the investigators who are authorized to do so. So you're going to have teams of crime scene analysts, chemists, other people that can freeze things, take photographs, and document things as they sit upon the arrival of the officials, and then very methodically go through the scene, but more importantly than that, go back and find the communications devices that this individual utilizes, his cell phone, his computers. They'll identify his home and do a search warrant on his home. They'll do a search warrant on his vehicle. And this is all in an attempt to understand motivation, to understand what led up to this, to figure out things like where he got the weapons and things like that. And I say he because most likely, because of the statistics, this is going to be a male suspect.
All right. The question, of course, on everybody's mind, given what we recently saw in Uvalde, Texas, what do you think has happened? What kind of discussions have happened in police stations across the country when it comes to shootings at schools? Obviously, there was a protocol in place before Uvalde, and even if you go back to the events at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School, but clearly as threats have evolved, as people who get access to weapons increasingly get their hands on high-capacity weapons, what do you think the conversations are like now in police stations about how to approach a scene and what to do to secure the scene?
Well, Vlad, that conversation goes back to Columbine, where the whole protocol changed dramatically, and everybody in the country has been trained up on this. But tragically, these are human systems, and sometimes there are very good responses, and sometimes there are very poor responses, and Uvalde is an example of that. But I can tell you, after talking to my colleagues across the country, that everyone is really preparing and reinforcing the lessons that we learned from Columbine. And that basically is go to the sound of gunfire. Do not, stand back, do not secure the area and wait for the SWAT team. You really need to move on these things. And it can make the difference between life and death. So hopefully that has been resolved after this terrible tragedy in Texas, but you never know in these situations. Looks like here they got right in there. Clearly, this is a very rural area. If you look at the map, it's surrounded by farms, probably not a lot of police resources close by, but whoever responded immediately clearly get in there quickly and secured the place from the looks of things. So hopefully this is a textbook response.
You know, the other thing that we've seen over the last several years is is training for kids in the school. Training is not the best word, but you did a story on this.
Yeah.
This whole, it used to be duck and cover, now it's run, hide, fight.
Right.
Right. And I'm wondering if these drills actually work. I don't know. That's probably not the best way to sort of say the question.
Can I jump in on that?
Yeah,
because one of the things that I saw, Ed, when I did a story on children, as Anne-Marie suggests, protecting themselves, and what was kind of unique about this was done in sort of rural Ohio, and the school also asked the parents to come in and see how the kids were training to protect themselves in the event of an active shooter. And two things that I saw happen. One, the parents would already sign release forms so that the kids can participate in this training, but had never seen it. Once they saw with their own eyes these little, and these were fourth graders, so really little kids, trying to barricade a door. There are these little tiny 4-foot humans grabbing pencils and scissors to try and protect themselves. The parents started to cry when they sort of the realization as to what was being asked of these little 4-foot humans was dawning on them. And then to the point that Anne-Marie is making, then you have to say to yourself, like, would a child with a pencil or even a pair of scissors be able to realistically do anything with somebody who comes in with an AR-15 style rifle?
And can I add to that too, in like that because your story was very, very moving. From a parent, as a parent, one of the things that I noticed with my own child is I think she's probably done one of those drills, maybe in the time she's been in school. So I wonder just how often it's even being done across the country.
Well, Anne-Marie, people are struggling with that question. How often should this happen? How much trauma does it involve to the children who are going through it to even think about these things? And Vlad, your point about what can they do, it is really a last-ditch effort to try to save their own lives. So these are very difficult questions that companies are dealing with and communities are dealing with. But in the military and in the police, we've learned that people fight the way they're trained. And that was so true for me in the Boston Police Department when we responded to the terrorist event. That helps even with children.
Commissioner,
even with children.
Just give me, sorry to pause you there, but it does look like we are about to hear from officials on the ground. So, Ed, thank you very, very much. We appreciate it as always. Ed O'Keefe,
we were just talking
to Ed O'Keefe. Ed, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Local and federal partners here at the Perry High School. This morning at approximately 7:37 a.m., we had a Sears radio activation at the high school, which indicated an active shooter situation. An officer first arrived within 7 minutes of that activation and located multiple gunshot victims. We're still unclear of exactly how many are injured or what the extent of those are, but we're working on that right now. There is no further danger to the public. The community is safe. We're just now working backwards, trying to figure out everything that happened and make notifications. There'll be another update later on today. It's still very early. This happened at approximately 7:37 this morning. School didn't start yet, luckily, so there was very few students and faculty in the building, which I think contributed to a good outcome in that sense. But we'll have more information later on this afternoon. We will not be releasing any more information in the meantime. So please be patient with us so that we can talk with these victims and their families and try and figure out what happened. We won't be answering any questions today either, for right now. We'll let you know later on this afternoon, what time we'll be meeting back with you again, and we hope to provide more detail then.
So can we, just to be clear, you don't have a number of people who were injured in this?
We're still working on that.
Have you identified the shooter?
Yes.
What's their current status? Are they alive? Or?
We'll get to that later on this afternoon.
Can you confirm if the shooter was a student at the school?
I can't confirm that right now.
Can you confirm any deaths?
Is there
No,
a
not right now.
reunification center for families and students right now?
Great point. The reunification center has already been established, and at most of those, I think all the kids have been reunified already. So we're good in that area. Thank you.
Were there any faculty members that were hurt?
I can't answer that question yet.
Have you made any apprehensions or arrests?
Can't answer that question yet either.
We'll take no further questions at this time. We'll see you
When's
this
the second
afternoon.
presser? Sorry, just want to make sure.
We'll let you know. We don't know.
Iowa Department of Public Safety will push out a message as far as location and time of the next press conference.
Okay.
So if you go to the Iowa Department of Public Safety website, it'll be posted there probably
Shortly after noon.
Shortly after noon.
Available?
I'm sorry.
Any surveillance video available?
There's nothing more that we're going to be able to
thank you.
answer right now.
We'll
Thank
be
you.
back.
Okay, not a lot of information there. We still have former Boston Police Commissioner Ed Davis with us. Ed, I think, help me understand, because if I'm a parent or my husband or wife works at that school, I would be incredibly frustrated as to, I'm sure they're probably sharing it with details with parents, hopefully, and with others, but to not even to tell the media whether or not it's children that have been injured or killed, or if it's faculty or anything, why even say anything at all then? What was the point of that press conference?
Right, Vlad. It is a very charged moment right now in Perry, and it is frustrating to see a lack of transparency. However, this sheriff is clearly emotionally affected by this. And in addition to that, you have to understand that behind that sheriff are local and state prosecutors, county prosecutors and state prosecutors who are driving the decisions on what can be released. And so everybody looks towards the prosecution and the protection of the victim's rights. But in some cases, and especially in jurisdictions that don't deal with these things, big events like this frequently, they err on the side of caution. And I think that's what you're seeing here today. They're keeping things very close to the vest. They understand the international attention this gets, but sometimes they overdo the protective thing, in my estimation. But remember, each jurisdiction is on their own, and the process that I'm sure the governor's office is involved in this, the prosecutors, it's a very complex decision.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And what I know everyone wants to know what's going on and whether or not their loved one is involved, but there is also an investigation that's going on. And he mentioned that he has already ID'd the shooter, but wasn't willing to give that name up. And I would presume right about now, there are probably investigators heading to that shooter's house if they're not already there. And the last thing that they want is a bunch of media following them.
Correct. Yeah, they'll respond immediately as soon as they get an address on the person, and they may not execute a search warrant. They may secure the facility. So what that entails is going into the home, removing anyone from the home that's there, and locking it down until they can get the proper court paperwork to do a search.
Yeah. And so, all right. So what can you expect will happen in the next couple of hours? I mean, we know that there's a staging area that has been set up for parents and others. What is sort of the next? I mean, you mentioned something that I think is become sadly, tragically common now, which is the number of federal officials and prosecutors that are already on the scene, including, we know, the FBI and the ATF.
Right. The coordination on the law enforcement side is a massive undertaking, and it usually is as good as the practice that's been done in the facility beforehand. So do the federal agents know the local officers? Do the local officers know the state officers? Can they sit down effectively? And as I say in briefings that I do, you can't make a relationship during a crisis. It has to be in place beforehand. And hopefully that's the case. And they're having these meetings right now, and that'll involve every level of government. But the other side of this is the victim side, and having people who are in charge of taking care of the victims' families, taking care of the victims, doing the notifications, all of the other work that needs to be done here is really a complex undertaking in and of itself, and somewhat separate from the law enforcement response.
All right. So one of the things that we're sort of grappling with here is, and I know that there will be people that are going to say that this is the politicization of what is happening, that we should be focused on the tragedy. But given that we don't have a lot of information, and given that you're the former police commissioner of a very big city, I just want to get your thoughts on the fact that we've increasingly, since Columbine, seen school shootings, mass shootings happening across the country. Is it in your mind, this is perhaps in your experience, but also partly in your opinion, the fact that Americans have more access to weapons than they've ever had before? I mean, think about to when, Ed, you started out as a beat cop. Can you give us a distinction between what you were facing as a beat cop in Boston when you first joined the police force to ultimately what the young guy who joined the force when you were police commissioner was dealing with when it came to members of the public and whether they had access to the weapons and especially the types of weapons that they have access to now?
Oh, it's a world of difference. My first 2 years on the job as a walking police officer, I took 2 guns off people in 2 years. And now my son is a detective and is seeing guns every day or at least every week. So the frequency of encounters has gone way up. And I think it's a terrible comment on our society that our children can't go to school without fearing something like this. This was just unheard of in the late 1970s when I came on the job, and now we've evolved to a point where it's almost an acceptable situation, and that is tragic. It's a terrible comment on us, our political structure, and this historical part of our country.
It must be frustrating as somebody who's spent a career in law enforcement to watch these conversations in politics come and go. And one of the things that I thought to myself was, we've been covering a lot of politics. A lot of national reporters are in Iowa because of the caucuses. And so over and over, we've been talking about what the concerns of voters are. What do they care about in Iowa? Gun violence has actually not come up.
I know,
right? We've
which is
talked a lot about
remarkable.
the economy and immigration, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to put money on gun violence because it's happening right here, right now. It's going to rise to the surface temporarily in the conversation. And then it's going to sort of slip right back away.
I don't know. It's Iowa, which is a conservative state where my guess is that because we've seen this play out over and over again, that members of the United States Senate, conservative governors, no matter, I mean, you would have thought that things would have changed after what happened in Connecticut. Nothing has.
Right.
So, Ed, I don't know what your thoughts are on that. We're sort of, at this point, because we don't have a lot of information, we're sort of getting into now sort of macro ideas and analysis about gun violence overall in this country.
It's really disturbing. As someone who's been to hundreds of homicide scenes, I have very strong feelings about this and why we can't have a rational conversation and come up with some effective ways to prevent this from happening. Let's look at the data. Let's look at studies. Let's find out evidence-based practices that can reduce the possibility of your children or grandchildren being murdered by some maniac. There's got to be a way that we can do this, and it requires coming together, but it's tragic that we can't.
All right, Ed, thank you so much for sharing your expertise, years of experience in this area. Really appreciate talking to you.
Thank you.
We're going to bring in our other Ed now, Ed O'Keefe. He's been on the scene there in Iowa. He arrived a short time later. Ed, we were talking about, you were actually there covering politics, and often when we have a major incident like this, the political conversation shifts, at least for a period of time, to the concern here, which is possibly, gun violence in schools and safety. And who knows, maybe that'll happen once you head back into your political area. But in the meantime, I know that you've got a bit of an update in regards to this situation. What can you tell us?
The county sheriff, Emory, a little while ago came to tell the gathered reporters that the incident, at least, is over for now. There is no danger to this community of about 8,000 people, which is about 40 miles northwest of Des Moines. And that at this point, they cannot yet tell us the exact number of people wounded or potentially killed. We have heard various numbers bandied about, but we're not going to report any until the authorities tell us. And the fact that they're holding off suggests that this remains a pretty fluid situation. Part of the reason why the sheriff is probably holding off, we witnessed ourselves a little while ago, in that a student who lives 2 blocks from the school had gone home, having been in the lunchroom when the incident happened this morning. That's what he told me, at least. Was then compelled to come back towards the school because he was grazed with something on his back and was bleeding. And so he was seeking police or EMT assistance. And he and his brother are students at the school, and they tell us that it was a student who was the shooter. We did not get the name, we don't know what year, but it shows you how sort of quick this was and how quickly people fled the scene, that this one student felt compelled to go home and then walked back to seek medical assistance. He's fine, based on my conversation with his stepmother, physically, and was being treated for what is mostly a superficial wound, but it hit his left lower back, and I think when he got home he realized he probably needed somebody else to check it out. And again, he lives only 2 blocks from the school, so given that this kid left and is walking back, that changes the number, potentially. So that may be why they're holding off. This was the first day back at school for this high school, which is connected to the local middle school and near the elementary school. Those two have been cleared. Reunifications are continuing a little ways away from here. We saw cars speeding up with parents trying to go find their kids and police officers directing them on where exactly to go. It's a scene all too common across the country, and one that local authorities, as well as those across the country, have trained for and are prepared for. And we saw dozens, if not hundreds, of police, sheriff, state police, all rush to this town, again, of about 8,000 people. The high school has about 1,800 students, and the sheriff says that they will have more to tell us later today after 1 p.m. Eastern, after noon Central Time. But it was clear from what he was telling us that they have a lot more to sort out before they can say more, in part because they want to be able to inform families. But they do know who the shooter is. He would not say what that person's condition is, and otherwise was asking for patience.
Ed, before we let you go, and I don't know, maybe you said this, but any word from the White House?
Yes. So while obviously we've seen FBI and ATF response here, which is typical in these kinds of situations, especially at a venue like this, we now know the Attorney General and the President both have been briefed on the situation, as they often are after a situation such as this one. Whether we learn more from the White House later remains to be seen. I know there's a briefing scheduled later this morning, but typically now when these kinds of mass shootings happen, he gets informed pretty quickly, and it appears in this case, according to our White House team back in D.C., that that is the case.
All right, Ed O'Keefe on the scene for us in Perry, Iowa. Ed, as always, my friend, thank you very much for jumping in at the very last minute. We appreciate it. We'll look forward to your reporting a little bit later. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk to our chief investigative producer, Pat Milton, about what she knows. Stick around.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
Human remains found this week.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
A gripping true crime original, 48 Hours, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
They can help us with medical discoveries, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7. That is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable.
The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Well, let me start with this.
This really happened.
Have you told the government?
Did any of that make sense?
What's your response?
You want me to just
What's wrong with that argument?
What have you learned?
Do you know why?
Why? Why?
It's time for 60 Minutes, Sunday on CBS.
He was there when the war in Ukraine started.
Extreme history. It's a big moment.
The extraordinary story behind Sean Penn's new Paramount Plus documentary, Superpower, when we go person to person.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
You had a substitute teacher that was pretty popular. What was his reputation?
Everyone loved him.
You had to miss a test. What did he offer to have you make up the test?
He said that I can come by after school was all over and just take the exam. The blinds were down. He closed the door. The next thing I knew, he was right next to me. That's when I realized what was going to happen. Even if I wanted to scream at the top of my lungs, no one would hear me because no one was there. He told me that if I ever said anything to anyone, he would kill me and he would kill my family. So I did it.
Pledge of Silence, now streaming on the free CBS News app. An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Since you started La Soup in 2014, do you have any sense as to how much food you've rescued from the landfill?
We've rescued 4.5 million pounds.
I can't even fathom how much food that is.
And that's one little person in one little city in America. We're going to call this chicken piccata. We did 450 of these meals today.
This is the exact dish that you and I are going to have.
Yep.
Oh my God.
Is it good? Mm-hmm. Having a plan of how to keep people fed should be in every single city.
So if we eliminated food waste, could we eliminate
hunger? Yes.
Eating Trash, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
All right, if you've been following along with us, we're following some breaking news out of Iowa. Dallas County officials say authorities are investigating an active situation at Perry High School, which has now been secure, about 40 miles northwest of Des Moines. The local sheriff's office there is saying that there has been a shooting. The scene is now secure. CBS News senior investigative producer Pat Milton has been talking to her sources, and she joins us on the phone. Pat, what can you tell us about what your sources are telling you?
Yes, I can tell you that we have been talking to law enforcement sources at FBI, at the ATF, at the Iowa State Criminal Investigations Unit, and they are saying what the sheriff has recently made public, that there were multiple gunshot victims. We do not know the condition of those victims, and they haven't given out the identity.
All right, Pat Milton, thank you very much. We'll check back in with you a bit later. We appreciate you.
Thank you very much.
All right, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's gonna be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today.
I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm gonna remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was going to be born, he was only going to live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift. Stream now on the free CBS News app.
There is no more room in our city.
New York City is receiving record numbers of migrants.
Today, we're going to have more than 500 adults and children come through that door.
Tensions rise as shelters reach max capacity.
We don't have to take care of them.
CBS Reports goes inside a crisis cities and families are facing as they fight to survive.
The United States still has a glimmer of hope for people to come here.
Fighting for a future. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She's a country music legend, philanthropist, fashion icon, and now rock star.
I think there's a lot to be said about being comfortable with who you are.
Find out what's next for Dolly Parton when we go person to person.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
That desired farm is a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She is a beloved American icon and head of a media empire. But is Oprah Winfrey happy? How do you define happiness?
Yeah, I call it happierness.
Find out when we go person to person.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
It was genocide, a deliberate effort by the United States government to eliminate the food source that was relied upon by Native American tribes.
American bison were slaughtered and Native Americans displaced.
And that's how tribes were subjugated to reservations and our lands were taken.
But now, through conservation efforts at Yellowstone,
Buffalo provided everything that we needed. Now they need help.
a herd grows.
We need to step up and help them.
And a culture is reborn.
When the buffalo return and come back, that's when our tribe will begin to heal.
Yellowstone Bison Revival, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
We're continuing to follow this shooting at a school in Perry, Iowa. We're going to throw it now to our Des Moines affiliate, KCCI.
Sometime just south of the Perry High School. Bo, you've had a chance to talk to some of the people who were in or around